Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Make Better. Adam, once again, we have some pretty cool guests joining us today. We've
Yep.
got Jalen and Liv from The Athletic. Yeah, really excited to have you guys on. So, Liv, Jalen, tell us a little bit about yourselves. What the heck is Athletic? What's this A? Yeah, just give us a rundown.
I love that you wear the hat, so we could both rep. I figured one of someone else on this call would be repping it with me. So gotta love it. Gotta love it. But yeah, we are both account executives at the Athletic on the sales team over here. So we are kind of the point people when it comes to ads between the producers and the clients. So we're relaying everything. And I came to the Athletic a- almost 3 years ago now. Been a while, and I came from the linear side, TV background. Totally different coming into podcasting, but after this amount of time here, have learned so much from you know everyone here, but also the great people that I've worked with, like you two as well. So, so yeah, I would say that's kind of the gist on me. Jalen, you want to? I know Jalen has even more podcasting experience.
No, you're far too kind. You're far too kind. First off, thank you guys for having us on. I feel like we've been talking about this forever, so I'm glad it's finally coming to fruition. But yeah, no, just like Liv mentioned, account exec at The Athletic. We like to say we're the largest sports newsroom in the world. And so we're the ones monetizing all of our podcasts, from little local shows about your favorite NFL team to national shows about the NFL. So we cover any sport you can think of, and we enjoy it. I've
You
been
do
here.
croquet?
Say again.
Do you got a croquet podcast yet?
We're working on that actually. We're looking for
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant.
yeah.
I'm
That's
like
what I'm
really into
for.
croquet
We're,
right now.
Yeah.
we're
High on the
making it
list.
happen.
High on the list.
We can make it happen for sure. But yeah, I've been here for about 3.5 years. I've done quite a bit with the Athletic. I kind of bounced around a lot of different teams. I was doing ad ops, so implementing the ads, optimizing campaigns, and then produced a show one time for a few months, which was fun. And then obviously now on the sales track and helping to monetize the podcast. So seen a couple different iterations of the Athletic, and that's been a cool ride.
That's so cool. So talk to me a little bit more about the sales stuff. So you guys produce and have a bunch of shows, and are you guys like working and finding advertisers to come and buy on your shows?
Yeah, yeah, you have it correctly right. So we work with a lot of audio, agencies like Adam here with us. And so yeah, trying to figure out which brands really make sense for a sports company, right? So
Okay.
we work, yeah, day in and day every day trying to figure that out and trying to, throw some ads onto all of our pods.
When we first started the podcast network, just something interesting, I guess, about our shows as a whole is that it really began from having this robust, very experienced this expertise in the sports space. You had all of these writers that were coming out of from their local areas. They knew every ins and outs of every individual team. So you have these experts really in their field, and we were kind of like, there's got to be more that they can do. So a lot of our hosts now, we have a few shows that have come and joined our network that were podcasts first. They started a show and then they joined us. But most of our shows, a large majority, are actually writers turned podcast hosts. So at the start, there was sort of that transitional phase. We had a lot of inbound requests, is what we were taking on the sales team. It was a lot of people who were fans of the writers, fans of their work already, or fans of the Athletic, that some even being, local advertisers that knew their, local sports writer. So they would reach out to us, and that's kind of how the advertising business started. And then as we grew and these shows became more what they are today, we obviously grew the business largely. Now we have relationships with agencies, direct buys, and most of our advertisers are more focused on the national scale of things, a national audience, as opposed to sort of just that local audience that we started with. That makes sense.
Cool. Yeah, yeah, totally.
Nice.
So obviously like sports podcasts, right? Like if you sell jerseys or something like that would make sense to like advertise on the podcast. But like I'm sure that's not just your demographic. What are you guys looking for? What are there any like themes in terms of advertisers that you guys find and that buy on the shows? Like, yeah, what brands, do you think could work on your guys' shows?
Yeah, I can take that one. Yeah, obviously being a sports brand, that's, a niche kind of audience, right? So figuring out which brands really make sense, we're trying to do that every day. So I think some of the ones that kind of work for us, and not to, say like any one particular
Yeah.
advertiser, but those ones that are like those performance or workout clothes, stuff like that in
Mhm.
that lane,
Mhm.
dietary supplements, things of that nature that the host can kind of relate to work really, really well for us. And I think the reason that they do work well is for the host, they can use that and make sense to them. And it's something that, obviously a couple of those advertisers will send product out, which is always nice. And they love, Liv and myself for that when we can make that happen. So those are probably a couple brands, couple spots that we have some success in.
Yeah, that's a huge thing that we've since being acquired by the New York Times. We fell under the larger umbrella of the New York Times, kind of the sports arm of the New York Times, and with that brought a lot more resources for us to use. One part of that being just deeper audience statistics. And so us being able to find out more about what actually interests our audience outside of sports. They're all here because they love sports. It's a
Yeah.
subscription sports service. So they're here because we know we've got sports fans. And by the nature of sports, a large majority, it's a male audience. So we've had brands in the past that typically, go for a, any sort of like maybe a women's focused or family focused podcast and find huge success on ours just because yes, they're sports fans, but they have things outside of their life than aside from just sports. So people who we've had success in the past with clients where they've said like, I don't know if that's going to work. We typically don't buy sports. They've tested and had success. And sometimes it surprises us even too, because you wouldn't think that, something like a caraway home or something that is typically geared towards women has huge success because, there's families. They have families and they also like to cook and have homes. So that's been, sometimes it's a struggle for us to get that across to advertisers, that the audience is more than just their sports interest, but that's the important thing.
That's right. If you're a sports fan and like you're watching the games, but you're also watching a podcast, like that's probably some of the most dedicated audiences. Like they're engaged in what they're listening to, whether it's just like people that they care
Oh
about, like talking about stuff, or they're keeping up with like game updates and stuff. It's probably out of some of the podcasts, that people listen to passively, it's probably some of the most engaged people. And so I think, outside of, whatever the advertiser is, like it's probably see some really, really good conversion rates and just overall ad, success because these people are looking to get updated on the things that they really care about, I think, versus, just listening to a health and wellness podcast where you're just sort of like, what can I learn today?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're completely right. You don't get much more dedicated than sports fans to their teams coming from sports fans ourselves, you know?
Yeah.
Totally. And then even just to, harp on that a little bit more, we're super fortunate because a lot of our hosts, we have close contact with them. So if there is a particular brand that maybe seems off the wall to myself and Liv, we can ask our hosts and they'd be like, oh, yes, I actually do like that company or that's something I'm interested in. So I think being able to have like a collaborative space is awesome for us
Mm.
because we're able to just send them a quick ping, a quick note, and they're more than open to get back to us and hop on some onboarding calls, which I'm sure Adam loves.
Yeah, the onboarding calls are everything. I love onboarding calls. And I don't actually get to go on too many these days. My only question before we really get into the meat of this episode or we dive into some podcast ads is what separates the athletic sports audience from, say, other sports audiences on other podcasts? Because there's obviously tons and tons of sports audiences out there. And what would make a listener choose to listen to a show at The Athletic versus maybe choosing a different show out there?
Definitely. Yeah. That's a question that we have to answer day in and day out. So it is what we like to say is journalism with a capital J. It is very brand safe. A lot of
Mhm.
sports podcasts out there, competitors of ours, have maybe a younger audience, less purchasing power, etc. With The Athletic, it is, it's very high quality journalism. It's also a subscription service. So with that comes a certain level, a certain audience, which is typically male or over, I don't know, I would say median age in 30s, affluent, high purchasing power, and highly educated. So we have a high level of our audiences, graduate degree and above. So I think those are ways that we stand out in as far as our audience. A lot of their interests revolve around travel and business and finances. And these are things that you might not get at other
Mhm.
sports outlets where you're having that younger TikTok generation, which,
Sure.
not to say I love TikTok, but it's just a different audience. And sometimes that is hard to get across because when you think of sports, you kind of go to those big standard, the bar stools, the overtimes, I could go on and on, but
Yeah, but isn't that the beauty of sports is that there's a bit of a home for anyone within the category under
Right.
the where you show up to a game and there's going to be your people that are in the box offices and they're there for the luxury of being at a sports event, et cetera. Then you have the hardcore dedicated fans that are there. They're fighting for every dollar to make sure that they can make it to their favorite game or whatever. And there's such a diversity of people coming into watching sports, and then the content that stems out of that serves different people in different ways. Similarly, like I'm wearing a John Boy hat or Barstool is probably a different type of sports audience from, say, The Athletic. And so I think so I work with a lot of brands that love advertising on sports, and we have to educate them on that there are different types of sports audiences. And
Very
you may
much.
want sports as a category, but there's a specific type of category within sports that you may want to target versus a different category. And so I think you hit the nail on the head in that there's a home for a lot of different types of sports related content, and The Athletic has carved out a really unique niche within that by doing the
Absolutely.
journalism of the athletic world.
I
So
am a consumer of all of the above. So
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah, I think
and
there's a lot of sports fans that probably dabble between both sides where they go like, I want that like gritty sports, like beef type content. And then I want to also get the stats and the hardcore, like journalistic side of things. And I don't think it's exclusive either way.
yeah, completely agree. I would add to Liv's points, which I think were really good. We talked to one of our writers this week on a call, and like one of the questions was explain The Athletic, right, in one word, and their word, which I thought was great, was purposeful, and that's kind of what we try to do at The Athletic is we tell the why aspect of the sport, right? Like we'll break down a play until your nose bleeds. We want to get into the nitty gritty of everything, and to your point, Adam, which I think is great, there's an audience for that, right? There's an audience for the really fun and like let's laugh a lot about particular sport or game. And for ours, it's a little bit more serious. I think Liv said capital J journalism, which I think is spot on. But yeah, it's just a different part of the sport, but also needed and has an audience too.
Yeah, and also I'd like to say too, just from the to both of your points, from the fan perspective, I guess I would say yes, when we refer to other sports networks, we refer to them as competitors, but we really do all aid each other. We all work together in the larger telling of the story of sports and what's going on at the time. Adam, you mentioned you're wearing a John Boy hat. Makes me think back to the Astros when the Athletic broke the story, and then it was John Boy's video who actually got the video evidence of the cheating scandal. So in that way, if you go back and look at the story of the Athletic and of John Boy, they're tied together even just from that one moment. So, and it really, the fans got both, they got everything they needed from both sides of those. And then obviously, there's so much more that blew out from there. But yeah, I mean, I'm a fan and a consumer of every type of sports news, like we mentioned before. And we really do all work together in a lot of unique ways. So I think that can benefit advertisers as well to take a look at what everybody's doing and where they might fit best, but where there might be ties across all of the networks.
Awesome.
Well, that said, maybe this is a good segue for us to actually start to make some judgment calls on some of these brands advertising on some sports related
Make it
content.
happen.
Yes.
Let's do it.
So we pulled some cool ads from some different shows, and I think we even have an athletic show in here. So I mean, you guys will be grading,
You're gonna
your own
grade your
homework.
own homework.
There you go.
Yeah, what you guys think.
We'll try to stay unbiased, but no promise.
Yes. Okay, cool. We've got three ads that we're going to be listening to. They kind of range. There's a couple products, and then there's like D2C types products, and then there's one that's more, I think it's like finance and banking stuff. So let's dive in. All right, I'm going to play this one. Let me know if you guys can hear it, and then after listening to it, we'll sort of go around the table and share our thoughts, and then we'll end with the scores and all that sort of stuff. We're going to be listening to, let's see, we'll start with this one.
End on the athletic one.
Yeah. Yes, good call. Colin Cowherd podcast, and the brand is Cuts Clothing. You guys know them?
Yes.
They're like the
We
fancy
work with them.
t-shirts. Yeah. So really cool
Yep.
brand. All right, let's listen. Here we go.
Duel now live in Ohio. We all know professional athletes care about what they look like. And as you know, I care about what I look like. Right now, I've been wearing a lot of Cuts clothing. I love this thing right now. Every Cut shirt is designed to provide a perfectly tailored look. If you want a long sleeve Henley, no problem. A short sleeve crew neck, they've got it. Cuts has everything you want. And I've got all of it, and I wear all of it. Right now, 15% off your first order. 15% off first order by going to cutsclothing.com/Colin. Cuts, C-U-T-S. Look them up. I got a closet full of their stuff, and I love it.
All right. You guys got good gist of it?
Yep.
All right. Adam, let's have you go first.
All right, I'll kick it off. Okay, so I do like what he does at the beginning there, where he hooks in the audience and he kind of opens up the premise to say, like, you know that athletes care about what they look like, and I care about what I look like, and therefore, and so he's hooking to the idea that if you're a listener and you care what you look like, which you might because you care what athletes look like, therefore, he is about to introduce a brand that's going to fill that void for you. And I like that he goes into it and gives a kind of almost like formulaic ad read where it hits all the points of like a tailored cut. This is it. And that's the whole premise of the brand is like Cuts Clothing. It's like pick your color, pick your design, and pick your cut. You're supposed to they have a variant of everything in the same color suite. So you can build out your whole closet, but different cuts or whatever. So you can get the curved hem, you can get the straight hem, you can get the V-neck, you can whatever you want out of it. So there's always a style for you, and then you can pick whatever colors you want for it, essentially. And he doesn't go super in depth on that, which I almost wish he would, because that is the big value prop behind Cuts. But truthfully, that's what makes that brand so unique in terms of how they offer their offering. It's not just a set of things that you can buy or collections. It's choose your own adventure to some degree. And that's the beauty of it. So I would have loved to have seen him get a little bit more intentional on that part of it, but I think he hits a really formulaic ad read. It's super formal, super brand safe, super hits the call to action, 15% off. He very clear what you were getting on your first order. He hits everything very clean. You could never go to him and be like, you messed up the call to action. It was butter perfect. So in that regard, I like it. I wish there was a little bit more like almost human reality to it, where he like broke from the narrative of the tone of the voice and said like, no, like I wear this stuff all the time. I take it out to dinner, my wife, whatever the like subtle little human note to it would have added just enough flavor to it to push it over the edge for you. Still a decent read.
Awesome. All right, you guys, one of you guys want to go?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think I had a lot of the same thoughts, Adam, honestly, that the athletes know off the top, I love, especially in the sports space with our ads. I always encourage them to loop in whatever is going on in their specific sport they're covering at that time. And even if whether it's part of personal experience or just as a hook. And it's always nice to loop it back in there. It would have been fun if he had thrown something in there later again, like kind of to loop it back to the athletes just to keep the hook, I guess, if that makes sense. But overall, I really liked it. I liked how he was very deliberate, the way he was speaking, and put the right emphasis on the right words, which I think is kind of what Adam was saying about the CTA. I felt like he did a good job with that throughout, which is helpful because sometimes you listen to an ad and either it can sound way too scripted and sort of maybe part of sounding too scripted is that it doesn't sound like, it sounds like you have to listen to it again twice to understand to really understand what is the offer, what is this product. So I thought he did a really good job of telling the story of the ad, if that makes sense. It really, like, I could come across after one listen and tell you what I heard. And then I liked the clothing part. I think he did a good job of painting a visual. And I liked, he listed out a couple of the items, and again, very deliberately. So as he said each one, I was like picturing it kind of. It made me want to go and see what it looked like on the site. So I like that. I do.
Awesome. Jalen.
Yeah. I mean, I think Adam and Liv hit everything. I felt like they stole all my notes. But yeah, I would definitely say like, I mean, obviously one, like personal endorsement, right? And just he said I felt like 100 times, which is great. Obviously they're listening to Colin for a reason. And if he says my cuts, then, they might be more inclined to do that. So I thought he killed that aspect of it. It did feel a little bit like too scripted for me. Like I think Adam, which I totally agree with, like the human element of it would have been really nice to give maybe an example or two about wearing cuts. Maybe he wears it to his son's baseball game or just something that maybe was just an added touch that you could relate to. So that'd be, really my only knock on the read. I thought it was terrific. Other than that, I would say one other thing, which is rather small, that I did like. At the end, I like that he spelled out cuts, like CUTS. I think sometimes you can say something so fast, whether it's cuts or another agency, that it's, you don't, or client, excuse me, that you don't know the proper spelling of the of the word. So I mean that if he says cuts, you could think, I mean, maybe it's K, like it's a funky brand that we're working with now. So I like the fact that he did that. I know from a network standpoint, like The Athletic, that's something if clients don't add into it or on the copy, we try to add that in there, pronunciation or just how it's spelled, and even saying spell this out like a certain way, because I just think that's valuable for the listener. So those are my takes.
I
Awesome.
want to add something before you jump in, Amelia.
Yeah.
So, okay. And this is only because I genuinely love this brand that I'm adding this in because great product, by the way. If you're listening to this and you want
Sponsor us.
No,
it's fantastic.
Seriously,
I have
though.
some shirts. But they sponsor a bunch of professional athletes. So they work with like Nick Bosa of the Niners, et cetera. And so it would have been such a great hook for Colin to like lean into how cuts is a favorite choice of clothing of professional athletes. And he could name drop someone and be like, you might have even seen it. Nick Bosa was repping them on the field, the ball, whatever it is. He could have leaned into something there because it would have contextualized, like actually name an athlete that you talk about on your show regularly that is a user of this clothing. Boom, instant conversion rates going up because all of a sudden they're like, oh, if Nick's wearing this and Colin's telling me, you're just hooking a scenario in it. And this is
That
me asking for more than like, he would have to do the research to know that. I only know that because I genuinely freaking love the brand.
I was about to say, actually, and then we can move on. You bring up a great point. That's actually more of a question I'm interested in posing to you guys, but something like that. And when we know it's someone like Colin who doesn't really, he's a busy guy. Do you feel like those kind of details are something that the client should be throwing in copy as an option? Or do you think that should be more, who do you think the onus falls on to bring up those unique things? Because sometimes, listen, if you have someone sponsoring your show, it is worth your time to do the research and really make a meaningful read for them. But sometimes people, I mean, they might not even know to look that up because not every brand is going to be associated with an athlete or, look up the right things, et cetera, or even the time. But I'm just curious from everyone's perspective, where you think the onus falls to kind of get those little creative touches in there.
I think that no matter what one side of the coin's going to say, it's on the onus of the other,
Right.
to provide that at some level. And I think there's probably a bit of a both and in that scenario where some podcasters will just do that because they care and they want to like learn as much as they can about a brand that they're bringing on. So they'll do all that little stuff and they'll like find the story and pull it in or hook it in somehow. And when that happens, it's kind of like a glory moment for the brand or for the buyer who's doing the buying. They're like, oh, wow, that person really showed beyond the expectation that they cared so much more to go beyond what was in the copy. So I think that maybe there's like a little bit of a catch-22 where the buyer doesn't want to give too much there so that they kind of almost see if the podcaster will go above and beyond. Because again, if all of a sudden you tell all your podcasters, I want you to tell them that Nick Bosa
Right.
wears the clothing. Now all of a sudden,
Every ad read on every sports
Yeah,
podcast would be saying the same line. Yeah, right. It doesn't make it
Exactly.
special.
So that's where I think from a buyer's perspective and from a copy perspective, we always try to give enough that they can work off of and add their own flavor and creativity. So we kind of hope at least that the podcaster takes it very seriously and goes, man, I actually do really love this product and I want to learn more, and create a contextualization in their own life, whether or not by referencing an athlete or how they used it going out for dinner or whatever. That would be how I'd look at it.
Yeah,
Awesome.
that's such a great question though, because I ask those things all the time because I'm not the one producing the ads or buying them even. And I think like I agree with your point too, Adam, but I also think, he mentioned like, athletes want to look good, right? He could have easily tied that into some of the top athletes wear cuts. He might even not even had to mention the name. And I think that's probably something that Cuts probably could have just handed him in the talking points. It didn't have to be, hey, make sure you say this, but hey, here are a couple interesting facts. There it's worn by this, and this. So I totally agree. I think you're right. It could be both, but also that'd be a really good talking point for Cuts. Cool. I mean, I agree with everything you guys said. I think I really love the emphasis of the promo code. We've talked about this before, Adam, but like it made it feel exclusive. I think when they just say, hey, get 15% off, use code whatever, it's sort of like, oh, I could probably go to the website in general. And I didn't have to listen to this episode to know that this was a discount code or that, this was a special offer, but he made it feel very special. And I really like that. And then I think the other thing is, and to your point, Jalen, it was very, very much endorsed. I think he could have probably tied it into a little bit more of a real life scenario. Maybe, like you said, he goes to his son's baseball games or something like that, and he always wears them. But I didn't walk away from that being like, oh, he has never worn cuts. Like, I probably could have imagined him actually wearing one while he was recording that right there. So that was a really great example of like, he endorsed it. And obviously like clothing is different from like, a supplement or whatever, right? So there's probably less regulations around like making those sorts of endorsements, but I definitely totally believe that he wore it, and he's probably got his entire closet packed with it. And then the last thing that I'll say is that, we talk about this a lot with like food brands and stuff. And I forget the ad that we were listening to recently, Adam, but we were like, the one thing that some food brands don't mention is like how it tastes. And like, yes, it does this and it's great and it has all these vitamins and minerals, but like, does it taste, right? And I think this was a great example of how he took that same sort of concept and applied it here, because he talked about how they look good, and I think that even for some clothing brands that can be missed, right? You're talking about how it's comfy or it's made for your size or whatever, but he was just like, they look good. And at the end of the day, like, that's why people wear things. And if they have all those features and pockets, like, that's awesome too. But that was the why. And I think they did a great job at that.
There's always 3 layers to the answer there. So because it looks good is the what. How it makes you look good is because it sculpts, shapes, whatever. There's like a how aspect to it, but the why, you almost want to get to a different layer of like just saying like, if you look good in it, that's a level of depth. But if you say, actually, I was wearing this walking down the street and I was stopped 3 times by someone and they commented on how I look, that never happens. And it only happens when I wear cuts clothing. Now, obviously don't make a fictitious story up, but like, that is the level of depth where if you can get to that level of
Proving that,
you don't have to say, and it makes you look good. You can say, when I wear this out, I feel like I get way more attention. I feel like blah, blah, blah. The feel aspect almost matters more. Almost always in an ad read.
Yeah.
That is what a real personal endorsement feels like. When you hear that is a different type of ad read than it makes me feel good, or I feel like I look good in it. No. I wear this when I go out to the club on on Friday night, and I wear what?
There you go.
Give me something real, then, and then that's how you get
send
a
you
10
some
out of 10.
cuts, man. I'm gonna get on that for you, man.
Yeah,
Let's get this
seriously.
product.
This episode, Ethan's hooked me up before, and so Bias is all included.
You're selling me.
No, but that's such a good point, Adam, because that's the emotional component to it, right? Like, I can tell you what it is and I can state these facts that it looks great and stuff, but like, let's have somebody sort of like, the image of the mind thing or whatever we had talked about, theater of the mind. But like, if he had said that, hey, I was walking down the street or I was at my, son's baseball game and I had 4 people come up and be like, what the hell, that's such a great t-shirt. That like paints the picture for the audience to be like, oh, I would love that to happen, right? I want to walk down the streets of New York and have one on my t-shirt. So that's so great. All right, let's move on to scores. Yes, scores.
Okay, I'll start.
Okay.
I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. It had all the fundamentals of a good ad read. It was just missing some of that like pizzazz that would have leveled it up for me. It did nothing wrong. There was nothing wrong about the ad. It just was a good ad. Nothing amazing.
All right, Liv.
Oh man, I'm gonna go 8 out of 10, just because I feel like it did a lot of things right. There's a little bit of that extra that, that we've talked about that could have been added. But as far as what needed to be done and did I feel like I understood it and I would visit the site, all that, I think it did what it needed to do and had a nice tone to it. It was nice to listen to. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10.
I also, my notes have 8 out of 10.
You
Pretty
guys are person.
We might
Yes.
be. We might be. Very arbitrary, but yeah, 8 out of 10 for me.
Very arbitrary.
That's great. Awesome. All right, let's move on to the next one.
Wait, Amelia, what's your score?
Yeah, what about you?
I would go with this 7 to 8 out of 10 thing. I think I totally agree with you guys, right? Like, if I was the brand, if I was Cut, I wouldn't be unhappy with it. I think, I honestly think Cuts probably should have handed him a little bit more. And I think that's the fine line between like giving somebody a script and then having them not read it authentically and then letting them do their thing. But even some of those like talking points and stuff, hey, we work with some of these, some great athletes and stuff, and that just might be easy. It makes it easier for them to integrate it into what they're saying rather than telling them that they have to. So yeah, I think it was good. I wouldn't be unhappy with this. And it was quick and short, but I think for the most part it did hit all of the talking points that, if I was a guy listening to this, I'd probably go check it out. I love t-shirts and I want them to look good. So yeah, neat.
I like it. All right.
Let's do this.
Hit us with the next one.
This is Door Bumper Clear. You guys know this podcast?
No, but I was looking it up. It's a NASCAR podcast.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, so that makes this even more interesting because
It's
the
a very
advertiser.
unique sport.
Yes, very unique, very niche audience. I'm not super niche, obviously, it's huge, but like, very specific. It's Butcher Box, right? So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Butcher Box.
Yeah,
It's like subscription
definitely.
box for meat. I think it's like, grass fed, really awesome meat.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. And we can maybe talk about like how, Butcher Box maybe would have, how they've sort of approached like, let's run on NASCAR episodes
Oh,
or
yeah,
whatever. So
definitely.
let's give this a listen to.
If you're tired of searching the grocery store for meat you can trust, you need Butcher Box. They're a subscription service that delivers humanely sourced meat and sustainably sourced seafood right to your door. You can customize your box and it always ships free. Plus, when you sign up as a member, you'll get access to exclusive deals, delicious recipe ideas, and first dibs on their newest cuts and products. Butcher Box is giving us a special deal. Sign up today at butcherbox.com/C13 and use code C13 to get $20 off your first order. That's butcherbox.com/C13 and use code C13 to claim this deal.
Okay.
Cool. At least.
Is that the voice of one of the hosts?
No, I don't think so.
No.
That
I
was
didn't
gonna be
know
my, that
either.
was gonna be my question. Mhm.
I
So-
didn't think so.
My guess is that this was a buy that was made as either a run a network or some sort. And by the annotation of C13, I'm assuming this is Cadence 13 potentially. And this could have been an older ad once upon a time. I don't know when this ad was pulled from, but that's my thoughts on it. I was going to pull that up while we were looking. So let me see if I can.
No, it happened on the 18th.
Oh, must have just happened on
Yeah.
the
Wow.
Fresh read.
So that was definitely not 60 seconds, right?
Yeah, I think it was close to 30.
30
Okay.
seconds. It was at the end of the episode or near the end, about an hour and 52 minutes in. It might have been part of a dynamic ad buy, so potentially other people found it placed in a different section. Not a host read, so this is what we would call like a either programmatic or dynamic run a network buy. It's a pre-produced spot.
Yeah, right.
Produced read that's been put in. So you kind of have to judge them differently than you would judge, say, a
Right.
host read endorsement, because you're not getting an endorsement out of it. However, there was something sneaky they did in this read that I do want to highlight, and I'm kind of just jumping in now to the
Do it.
So
Do it now. You got me hooked.
the interesting thing that they kind of snuck in there is that they're giving us a special promotion. They almost hook you in by saying like, this is something that they're giving us. They're not selling anything. They actually put the ad reader in the position of consumer. I don't know if you heard that, but there was a part in there where they say,
No.
and they're offering us a special 15% off. They're not saying we're offering you something. So they're adding themselves in the seat of the consumer too. So they're trying to convince their friends, like, we should buy this, not saying you should buy this.
That's
And
interesting.
it's a really powerful hook to incorporate into ad reads, or when you're selling your friend, like, if I were to go, hey, Liv, Jalen, you guys should go to the Yankees game this Wednesday, blah, 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 whatever it is. And you're like, yeah, okay, we could. But I'm like, actually, Liv, Jalen, we should go to the Yankees game. It'll be such a good time, blah, blah, blah. It would be such a good opportunity if we all win. So and so. There's
Totally.
collective. You get pulled into the story that someone else is like, I'm going to buy this, so you should buy it with me. Do you see how that hooks differently? Really powerful.
Totally. That's another, this is actually another, I guess, not to go off the rails, but another tactic that I see used a lot, and none of our shows do this. And I feel like I see it most often with shows that are very personality based. But when you have someone, when the ad reader, the host says, I love this product, blah, 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 gives the whole read and is like, and by clicking this link and supporting our advertisers, you're also supporting the show. You're also supporting us, almost making the audience part of the show, part of their favorite show. It's like you can help us out and be one of us if you do this. So I'm curious to hear your perspectives on that, because I never see it in copy really written out like that, but I hear it all the time. And I'm curious if that's something that you guys think is effective.
Well, I think it's one of those things that some people just get it and they incorporate it into their speech regardless. I've realized that even with myself. Like, I know that I don't think that much about what I'm saying when I say it, but Amelia will often say, like, after I critique an ad and I give my variation of how I would do it, that just comes off the top of the dome. I'm not thinking about like how I need to do it. It's just the way that I have over time been trained to think about how to sell, how to promote something and talk about it. And that comes out of like a world of copywriting and doing ad creative testing and seeing how certain language hooks, or enough public speaking. Once you've spoken to enough people and you've seen what draws people in deeper, you can begin to reiterate those messaging elements into the way that you do ad reads or into the way that you do things. So you could kind of tell that, when someone says, I'm launching a new podcast and they're like this celebrity, really famous or whatever, And people are like, well, it's going to do great views. And it does do great views. But when they do their ad reads, they don't know how to sell a product.
Yeah, it's so true.
They're really influential, but they don't know how to promote something to get a conversion out of it. Whereas you look at a guy like Mr. Beast, and Mr. Beast, king of content,
Yeah.
he knows how to sell a product. He knows how to position things in a way that makes it desirable, engaging, interesting, without coming across as like he's just doing an ad. Like, he knows how to sell, and that is hard to
Totally.
do.
Yeah. No, but I think that's such a good point, Liv, because I like, it's one of the OG stats about podcasts, right? Is every advertiser, every agency talks about this. It's like, the audience actually appreciates. It's one of the last channels where the audience, there isn't ad fatigue, right? So they want to support the shows because they're getting it for free and they want them to keep and doing it. That's why Patreon was such a big thing. So I actually, when I listen to that, especially, I'm a big fan of like the Morbid podcast and stuff. Like I don't mind their ad reads. And so when she's like, comes on and is saying like, this episode was, supported and, you guys are being able to
Yes.
listen to this because of that. It feels authentic and it feels less salesy. So I think,
I agree.
I agree with you. I think it's to Adam's point, like it probably just comes naturally once, you're a copywriter and you've done this and stuff for so long. But I think it's probably outside of the fact that you're kind of giving away the fact that you're about to listen to an ad. Obviously, we can't avoid that all the time. I think it's better than this, show was brought to you by. I think if they sort of tie it in and it's like, thank you to this company because that's how
Yes.
you
Yeah.
get to listen. There's an appreciation there.
It pulls back the curtain a little bit, and it just for a moment, a split moment. And I personally, I really like it. I think it is a smart move. I think it is effective for me. Like what you just said, like when I have a show that I'm a huge fan of, or YouTube channel I'm a huge fan of, and I'm listening to an ad, going through the motions, quote unquote. But then when they say something like that, it kind of brings you back in, and you're like, I should support them. I should support the show. This is something. So I like that angle, but it's interesting to see who does it, who utilizes it, how they do, and why. So just a
Yeah.
weird point to bring up when you were talking about the us language,
Mhm.
Adam. But yeah, it's something I see a lot, and I like it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I agree. So let's go back to the voice thing because this is interesting, right? So Butcher Box,
Yeah.
actually, the first thing I'll say is they emphasize like the sustainable, and then they said something else. I was actually surprised that they went that route because I'm pretty sure one of Butcher Box's biggest things is like it's grass fed, and like if you're health and wellness focused and stuff, like everybody knows like the importance of grass fed. So I was sort of surprised that they went the sustainable angle because I don't even really know what that means or why that benefits me. Obviously, like I care about sustainability, but I was a little surprised about that. But Butcher Box being a meat subscription box, I would think that like men are probably a large majority of their consumers. I eat a lot of meat, so like I would totally buy it. But I was surprised knowing that and thinking or having that assumption that they had this woman do the read. And again, if it was if it is a run of network or if it's just being placed on a bunch of different shows and stuff like that, maybe there's other audiences or maybe there's other shows that this is running on where it's more female based. But I was surprised by that. And Adam, I'm curious to see if what your thoughts are. But if it is a largely male audience that purchases this product, does having a male give the ad read add value, or maybe there's a reason why it was a female? Maybe men are more receptive to a female's opinion than having another, beefy man or something talk about it.
Yeah, I got two thoughts when it comes to that. So one, there might be something to do with like the classic American household, and where generally speaking, it still oftentimes is the wife or the mother who does the grocery shopping and is going to make the end decision on where they buy food from. And so that could play a factor, even if it's the guy who's listening to the podcast and then goes to his wife, says, "Hey, I heard about that Butcher Box thing. Oh, you should take a look at it." And who knows? You don't know what the sidebar conversation
Interesting.
looks like. So that's a possibility where there's a hook there. And the other part too is it's hard to know who this is targeting because this isn't necessarily a baked in spot. So it's hard to know if they're actively targeting this show or if this was a run a network across a handful of shows. So the targeting part of this could be something that might be a little bit off. Hard to say though, but I do think generally speaking, Butcher Box from my like broad perspective generally targets male leaning audiences. So
Yeah. So both sides of that, I guess. We have a heavily male audience, and we've worked with Butcher Box, and from my experience working with them, they've typically gone for what we're all talking about. We imagine they've said like, tailgating season, cookouts, that kind of thing. Very much a host read, like get the family together, get the boys together, let's watch some football, that kind of thing, which does very well. And that's what we've seen with them. previously, and this is not ButcherBox, but having a heavily male audience, we have very rarely, but occasionally had requests from clients to have a female voice on the read. And the reasoning for that typically is there's a various psychological factors, I guess, they think might work well for them. But I think the very baseline is that it can make the ad stand out as opposed to, which is an interesting tactic because we always talk about host reads. Like we want it to be seamless with the show. We want it to feel very natural. And with some clients, occasionally, and it's again rare, but they'll want a female voice to stand out in that way, to be like, you've been listening all day long to 7 different NFL podcasts, a bunch of male voices, and then suddenly you hear this and you're like, what is this? Why is this here? So, which isn't, I don't know whether I would say effective or not effective, but it's just a different tactic that we've seen.
That's so interesting. I love that. I wouldn't have thought about that because you're right. I mean, if this is a guy or a guy is, the host of that show, and then all of a sudden a woman comes on, it does perk your ears up. And I think, maybe there's some arguments where that maybe makes somebody skip more because they're like, oh, yes, this is an ad or
Right.
whatever. But you're right. It probably catches your attention and that can itself be a hook, even if they didn't perfectly integrate it as a podcast. So that's a really good point.
Totally.
Right.
I think for this one, if I can put like my producer hat on for like 5 seconds, I think
What?
being able to listen to how clean it was, like from an edit standpoint, from just there was limited background noise, no clicks or that flowed very seamlessly. And I guess now it makes sense because Adam, you mentioned it possibly just being a run-of network or a dynamically inserted ad. But that, I mean, for me, listening to that, it's something you strive for as a producer to make sure it sounds very clean, just as an edit. So kudos to them for that one. A couple of my other notes, I guess, are a little bit thrown off now that it is the, run a network ad. I think if I'm listening to it as like a NASCAR, I guess, listener, particularly for ButcherBox, it would be obviously more beneficial to have someone who said, I brought this to this NASCAR event in Richmond,
Yeah.
something like that. Because that's, to Liv's point, that's why ButcherBox was on a couple of our shows, particularly our college football shows, to talk about tailgating down south and bringing these steaks to the tailgate. So, and again, it changes now, right? That it's a run a network ad, but I think it would be much more effective from a host that mentioned them being bringing it down to a tailgate at a NASCAR event. So that's all. And then also like there were just like no personal endorsement.
Nothing. Yeah.
Even if it is a run of network, I think it could be also beneficial to mention. I think you mentioned earlier, like the taste aspect of something like
Yeah.
does this taste good or is it like what is this? So even just little tidbits like that, I think would have helped the read.
No, I agree. I mean, and it's interesting because I agree with you. Obviously, like when somebody comes on and they endorse something, and that's the person you're listening to. You listen. If Joe tells me blah blah blah, and I'm a big fan of Joe Rogan, like I'm gonna listen. But there's probably ways they can still do some sort of endorsement. Even like mentioning review numbers or like understanding the audience that you're running this ad on, even if it is run of network, is probably a similar audience. Maybe it's a bunch of different sports shows or something like that. They could talk about, Carl from Nebraska, love this. I think there's probably other interesting creative ways where it could still be an endorsement of sorts. It's more of that third party validation that they probably could have integrated, even if you can't do a perfect endorsement because it's produced and it's, added in after.
100%.
I agree.
I know one thing that, we do, on our side as well is maybe like the ease of navigation, right? Like to ordering, ButcherBox, which even something like that, obviously it's not the taste aspect, but you at least can get the feel of, oh man, this takes 15 seconds to order. Like, oh, might as well, knock out and go grab me some. So even
Yeah.
smaller.
Yeah. There's so many things that could have been added here to regardless of whether it was going to be on a ton of different shows or not. There's so much more they could have done with this. And I think knowing that it was on a sports show, probably was on others. And most people who are listening to really any sports podcast all day long, their ears might not perk up at, the sustainability and grass bed. They're not really thinking about sustainability. They're not really thinking about food in that way, I guess, or like how their food's made in that moment. They're not listening to cooking podcasts or anything like that. So if you're just thinking about sports all day long, I feel like there's just even a general hook that could have been better for that audience that might have had them listen.
That's a great point. That's such a great point because you're right. Those people probably don't care. Maybe they care about it being grass fed or something, but they care about the taste. They care about how easy it is. They care about having the largest variety of filet mignon or something for when their boys come over to watch the game, right? Like those are all things that probably are way more relatable and intriguing for the audience. they're
Like,
targeting.
they're not going to show up to the tailgate and say,
Like,
these things were sustainable and grass fed. Like, I
Let's
want to know
do
how it tastes.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah,
get some
no, I
scores out
totally
here.
agree.
This episode's going to run long, so let's get some scores going, and then let's get on to our last read here.
All right.
All right, yes.
Let's kick it off.
Liv, do you want to start it?
Yeah, I mean, 3 out of 10, I would say, and that's me. It's hard because I'm saying well, if it's a host read or not, but I'm just gonna say overall, I can't imagine it's gonna perk a lot of ears.
For me, it was a 5, so maybe a
Okay.
little bit better than Liv's score, but yeah, not 50%. Still not too
And that was nice of you.
I was gonna give it between a 4 and a 5. I totally agree with you. I think overall, like to your point, Jalen, like it was good at it. It was produced well. I think she
Yeah.
you know wasn't perfectly scripted. It sort of sounded good or whatever. But I just think knowing that where it was advertised and then on the NASCAR podcast, and then also understanding that that's probably all the other types of shows that it was being run on. There was nothing that if I was a guy who watched NASCAR or really cared about sports and stuff, I just don't think there was anything in there that like really had an emotional tie to me. But I think that could have easily been changed. So yeah, I would give it a 4 to 5.
Yeah, for a 30-second produced ad with no endorsement, I actually will be less harsh on it because I actually love that they use the us language.
Yeah.
Really smart. And so I'm going to call it within the context of what it is, knowing that it's not an endorsed ad, knowing it's only 30 seconds, knowing they don't have any personal endorsement. If that was the objective, I'll call it a 7 out of 10 for that
Okay.
regard. If I'm just giving it a ranking as like an ad in the realm of ads, like 2, 3 out of 10. Like,
Okay, that makes
but
me feel
within the
better.
context of what it is and the purpose of which it was probably bought in, I think it's actually done a pretty decent job.
I agree. Yeah, it's very clean for that.
Yeah.
Just thinking about an ad across a sports network.
Yeah. No. And that's not to say, by the way, that like we don't like Butcher Box. I mean, honestly, like I
love Butcher Box.
Butcher Box ads. I think this was one that would honestly just be interesting to hear what their strategy around it was, because whether I have so many questions: the female voice, the sustainability stuff. I mean, I just think like there's always ways to improve and optimize, and I think we brought up a lot of really interesting ones. So, all right, let's move on. This is the last one. I don't know if you guys have heard of this like network or publisher, The Athletic, but
Yeah.
they have this interesting.
Oh, skip me. This is a 10 out of 10. This is a 10
Yeah.
out of 10.
All right. So this is the Athletic NBA show. So I'm assuming it's about basketball, if I got my sports correct. And it's Chime. Have you guys heard of Chime?
Yes.
And so
You know
it's
what?
a
I
it's an
will
online
give you the Google synopsis for anyone listening. Chime Financial Inc. is a San Francisco-based financial technology company that partners with regional banks to provide certain fee-free mobile banking services.
Woo!
So it's
All
banking
right.
with no monthly fees and fee-free overdraft.
Wow.
Up to
All right.
$100. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's give it a listen. Everybody ready?
After a word from our sponsors.
Listen, we're all looking for that song of the summer, that song that gets us on our feet, jumping, ready to dance. Do you know what my song of the summer is? Summertime and the building credits easy. That's my song of the summer. That song is via Chime, and that song you will be singing all summer long with the secured Chime Credit Builder Visa credit card, a better way to build credit. As in, you can build your credit score safely with everyday purchases and on-time payments. There's no annual fee, interest, or credit check to get started. Listen to this. Here's what a Chime checking account can do for you. You can get paid up to 2 days earlier. With a qualifying direct deposit, you can access your money sooner. Here's what you need to do to be smarter about your money, to be safer about your money, get that credit score bumping like the summer tunes we talked about. Start building your credit up. Open up a Chime checking account with at least $200 qualifying direct deposit to get started. Get started at chime.com/MBA show. That's chime.com/MBA show. The Chime Credit Builder Visa credit card is issued by Stride Bank, N.A., member FDIC. Chime checking account and $200 qualifying direct deposit are required to apply. Out-of-network ATM withdrawal fees may apply. On-time payment history may have a positive impact on your credit score. Late payment may negatively impact your credit score. Results may vary.
This is an interesting one. I want to hear your guys' thoughts.
Jalen, kick us off.
I will go first. Absolutely. So as a producer, very clean. Edit was seamless. I definitely enjoyed that. So for any, I guess, financial service company, it's easy in a read like this. It's easy to be boring. It's going to be like very jargony, if that's a word I can make up right now. And I felt that this particular host, who I know, I thought did a really good job of like being engaged with the jargony of Chime and being able to at least come across a little bit passionate or as passionate as you can be in talking about something like this. So I thought he did a really good job in being able to relay that over. So yeah, I mean, again, like it was a solid listen. It was an educational. I'm not saying I'm going to go out and buy Chime or use their services tomorrow, but in terms of an overall read, I thought it was pretty decent.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about this one, sorry to jump in, but is that like, we were talking about cuts clothing and there's really nothing they could say or they couldn't say, right? That would have any issues from an FTC standpoint or a
Right.
regulation standpoint. But
Right.
banking, insurance, mental health, all those sorts of things, I think they're up against something because they have to be really careful about what the hosts are allowed to say. They're probably looking at air checks every single time they're run. And so this was a minute and 30-second ad. And I think the last 15, 20 seconds, they had to go through all those. So I think like knowing all of that and keeping that in context, I do think they did a good job. I think you're right. At the beginning, I was a little confused about the song thing he was talking about, but if anything, that confusion sort of was a hook of itself. I was like, wait, where is he going with this? Which, caught my attention and stuff. But I think knowing all of that and how difficult it can be from, whether it's a host endorsed perspective, maybe he can't even say anything about that. He probably can't talk about, how it's helped him save money, right? Or any of the other things. I think they did a really good job again from the educational standpoint and it sounded easy, all of that sort of stuff. So I think those were my initial thoughts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I think overall, like within the confines of knowing that some brands are hard to give ads for because of all the, the rules that you need to follow around them, it was really well done. Like the hook at the beginning pulls you right in. You don't feel like it's an ad until all of a sudden you get into it. And then you're like, oh, okay, well, I might as well stick around now. Like you pulled me in, so I might as well stay. And it's not an endorsed spot. It's not him saying, I use this, blah, blah, blah. But that's kind of okay, especially for a service like this. You almost kind of don't necessarily need that for financial services in that realm. I liked it. It was pretty good. I don't really know how Chime is different yet from other things.
Yep.
That is one of the things that I would have as a financially conscious person. How is this working? And that's where, I always get a little turned off the moment all those like discretionary things come up at the end. It's like, results may vary. Your credit score may be negatively impacted, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
I'm like, okay,
Might
so
cause heart attack. Yeah.
yeah, like
Right.
all that stuff almost causes me a pause, which is an unfortunate necessity to these ad read because it almost pulls you out of the ad at the end where you're like, maybe I don't want this, but you might go look into it anyways. And if you're a person that's in need of a service like this, then perhaps you've already been curious enough that you just go and check it out regardless.
Agreed. Yeah. So I was going to say sometimes it's nice when the producers will speed up that disclaimer at the end, which I mean, some clients will explicitly state that that's something you can or should do, whereas some clients will be like, no, you can't do that. So I think it would have been nice. It would be nice if they could have done that at the end because I agree with you. And then I guess for me, it agreed with everybody else. I've seen this copy from Chime before. It doesn't require personal experience for all the reasons that we referenced. So in that sense, I think hit the mark. And the voice, and this is a biased perspective now, but works in this situation because his voice is familiar to me and to the listeners it would be as well. And so I think that helps that I've heard some of our hosts, it's other hosts too, not just ours, but I've heard hosts that get a read like this that's jargony and they sound almost exasperated as they read it. They have a different cadence. They sound like they're just really struggling to get through this thing. And I will give him points for not sounding that way. Sounded like himself, sounded normal. And I think, people who listen to our shows will know his voice. And so I guess that kind of makes sense. So yeah,
Fine. Adam, you were going to jump in and say something.
give me a
was gonna
second.
say, when you were talking about that like tagline at the end where they have to go through all the disclaimers, is the worst thing that I've seen is when they do a great ad read and then it actually cuts to like a pre-recorded like blah 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 blah, and it's like not even the same voice of the person. So I like that they kept it the same voice, but in the event that your show hosts don't want to do that part and to not take away from what they just said, you could use something like that. And those types of brands, it might be in their best interest to provide already sample file that is, say, 5 seconds or whatever it is, or 10 seconds of however long it takes, that they can just send with the ad and say, like, please insert this at the end of the ad read it takes 5 seconds. If you need to trim your ad read down to 55 seconds instead of 60 to fit that in, do that. And that would be a really good compromise for some of those brands to fit in what they need to say at the end, because I'm assuming, coming from a buyer's perspective, is that if a host were not to give those things at the end of the ad read, they might come to you and say like, hey, we need to have that pulled and re-uploaded with a new ad that has the proper discretion set. So that'd be my compromise as coming from the generous buyer perspective, to say here would be a way to help mitigate those issues.
Cool. As a score for me, I probably would give it I had 8.
I'll go next. I'll call it I'm going to give it a 6. And that's just because I still don't really understand Chime at the end of it. I don't really, and that's maybe just me not getting this type of a service. It's a fine read. I really like the hook. The hook is the best part of this. The hook, I'd give like a 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10, because it pulls you in. It gives you curiosity. It's a good host read. There's no endorsement, but you really can't get much endorsement here. So to me, it's a 6.5 maybe. It's not bad. Like, I'm fine with it. And if I was the buyer, I'd be like, yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a 6 to 7 for sure. I go back to the hook thing. I think that was really interesting. No, I think, again, like really, really clean. And even the end stuff, like I still think he did a good job at that. And honestly, like we've all watched those like commercials, the medicine ones where they're talking about, some new pill solves whatever. And they like have the super small copy that just like runs through and they, it may cause death and internal bleeding.
Yes. That's crazy.
Yeah, you're almost like as an audience, like, oh, like, ooh, like what? Like, don't do that. That it just seems really shady. And I actually really appreciate that he didn't do that and he sort of read through it, despite the fact that it was incredibly, boring and people don't want to listen to that. I again, as somebody that is listening to something that is considering a software like that, I think I want to know all those sorts of things. And so I think that him not speeding through it and not making it sound again like shady or whatever, I think actually added some authenticity and value there. So yeah.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. I didn't think about it like that. It does give it a little bit more authenticity.
Yeah.
And at the end, I did like the way that even the way he was reading it, like that last sentence, it was just still kind of engaging. Just the tone of voice that you use, the kind of instant ebbs and flows that you use helps people be able to listen to it without being like, I got to get this out of my ears right now.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Great. Thank you guys. Any last minute thoughts, any best practices you guys want to share with us?
Ooh, I think from our perspective, the biggest challenge that we face being in the position that we are is just making sure that we have the producers, we have the hosts, the content creators, for lack of a better word, that want to make everything seamless with their show, their content, what they're doing, what their schedule is. And then we have clients who want everything to perform for them as well. So, and sometimes the two missions are misaligned, but we can find ways to align them. And I think just something I want to take away from this conversation with you guys is just, a little bit more tips and tricks for us, when we talk about who the onus falls on in certain situations, how we can make ad reads better and how we can help our content creators, our producers, our hosts, how we can aid them with the resources to make ads better, because they will do it. They're all creative. This goes for any podcaster, but for the most part, working with the content side of things, they are willing and able and creative and awesome. And you just kind of have to give them the tools sometimes to be able to see the value of really putting in the extra effort for their audience, for themselves, for the sake of the show. Because an ad read doesn't have to be boring, Doesn't have to be. It can be very much part of the show.
Why make an okay ad when you can make better?
Make better.
Exactly.
Better.
Make better.
That's it. Need t-shirts. Make better, baby.
We can make better.
We can make better.
My takeaways, honestly, this was terrific. Again, as I mentioned at the start, I'm so happy we were able to finally do this. Yeah, I would say like for us as a publisher, there's like more information that we can share with one another helps everyone. I think feedback about reads, right? Or information to see how stuff is tracking and delivering is always super helpful for us. I know one thing that we've started to do a little bit more is giving, some clients, agencies like courtesy reads. Hey, check, this is maybe will be the flow of the read before it launches, which is helpful for everybody, right? So I think being able to share information and be open and transparent about things that are going on with the read or how it could be better from a feedback lens is always helpful. And that's why this podcast was created, right? So that we can all, make better ads.
Guys, why make good when you can make better?